But episode 1 was on Bret and Shawn. Just like The Undertaker, we have seen this story retold over and over and over. I have spoken about the screw job many, many times before in great detail about the screw job. And you guys have heard all of my thoughts. And there's always these little things in the story when we hear about this stuff that I think I've always felt a little bit skeptical about, or it's WWE's retelling of the version because it makes for a better story to tell it this way. And I noticed a couple of holes that they had here. The first thing they mentioned was when Bret Hart was leaving to go to WCW in 97, they made it sound like on the Rivalries doc or on the Rivals doc that he made the choice to go to WCW, that he left WWE, defected to WCW while he was still champion. Now, Bret was a part of this, production, so I'm surprised he didn't correct them there. But we all know that night in Madison Square Garden, September 22nd, 1997, the same night Vince McMahon got stunned for the first time, the same night Goldberg debuted on the other show, Vince McMahon and Bret Hart had a meeting in the office at MSG. Vince said, I cannot afford to pay you your 20-year contract. Remember last year when you negotiated that deal with WCW and you signed with me instead? Go back to them and see if you can get that old deal. That was all orchestrated. This is well documented, told over and over and over. But here, for the purposes of this documentary, they tried to make it sound like Bret made the choice, which I guess really he did. I think Vince was like, take a pay cut or go to WCW. So Bret chose to, go where the money was. That's what he should have done. But it was Vince that did the forcing there. It was Vince that did the pushing. It was Vince that decided he no longer wanted to honor the contract. So the fact that he had the creative control worked in, he wasn't even supposed to leave anyway. The creative control in his contract should not have been a factor because he wasn't even supposed to leave. If Vince would have never had that conversation with him in Madison Square Garden, screwjob never would have happened. Or Vince just waited a couple of months to let Bret go. Why it had to be done right there and right then with Bret as your champion is beyond me, because now you put yourself in a position where you got to ask Bret to job to somebody he hates. And one of the big questions I've always had about the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels saga, Bret mentioned this a couple of times in shoot interviews over the years, and I know in WWE's productions, I know he mentioned it in his own DVD, and then that really good sit-down documentary they did with Jim Ross years ago, after Bret came back and Shawn and Bret patched things up, and they talked about the entire situation. Bret has mentioned this a bunch of times, and that is after WrestleMania 12. You guys can't see it, but it's right above my head. I have the plaque and a piece of the ring from WrestleMania 12, the Shawn Michaels autograph thing. Bret says that after the Iron Man match, which they talked extensively about on Rivals, that when when the announcement is being made that Shawn's the new champion, you can see Shawn, and Bret says that Shawn told Earl to tell Bret to get his ass out of the ring. Get the fuck out of the ring. That's what Bret thinks Shawn said. And every time I've heard that, I'm like, I know Shawn was starting to become a pain in the ass in 1996, but his friends were still there. The clique was still intact. He was winning the title in the main event. He's somebody I'm sure that knows that in a real fight would get the absolute shit kicked out of him by Bret Hart if it came to that. At that time in 96, I didn't see there being a reason for Shawn to be a prick to Bret, especially after Bret just gave him his body for an hour. 1997 Shawn, maybe a different story. Even late 96 Shawn might have been a different story. But here in this moment at WrestleMania 12, I always thought that was weird. I'm like, would Shawn really have said that? I know Shawn loves the spotlight, but just never seemed like something that even Shawn would have said. And Shawn's an asshole. And they bring it up here again. And even when you look at Shawn, like they try to show Shawn's mouth moving as he's talking to Earl. And he does say something like out of the ring. You can see his mouth say that. But if you remember, and I've watched this match a million times, they made a big deal about Bret Hart not shaking Shawn's hand. And after the 3 count, Shawn does the thing, and then the music is playing, and Earl has got the belt. And Earl comes up to Shawn to kind of like give him the belt, but Shawn is trying to tell him something, and Earl's kind of hesitant. He hands him the belt and then kind of pulls it back. And what I think they wanted, because we got this perfect camera shot when it happened, what I think the intent was for Earl to present the belt to Shawn with Bret watching. And when Earl was trying to give Shawn the belt, Bret was face down on the mat, selling the super kick. So what I think Shawn was telling Earl, because Shawn has said over and over he doesn't remember saying this. He's not saying he didn't. He just says he doesn't remember it. On the Rivals episode, he says it's all a blur. You know, Shawn's Mr. Christian man now. He wants to tell the truth if he can. This seems like a weird thing to lie about. If he really doesn't, you know, if he said that, he would be like, oh yeah, I said it. You know, he claims he doesn't remember. So what I think Shawn was saying to Earl, because Bret was laying face down and they wanted to get the camera shot of Shawn receiving the belt in front of Bret's face, I think Shawn was telling Earl, wait until he's leaving the ring. And if you read his lips back, he's probably saying that, like, wait until he's getting out of the ring, or just wait until he's leaving the ring, is what I think he was telling Earl. And then, sure enough, Bret gets to his feet. He starts walking to the ropes. He looks right over at Shawn and Earl, and then Earl presents the belt to Shawn. They got the shot they needed. Bret gets to watch that happen. He leaves the ring upset, takes the straps down, peels away in the car. But I think it sounds better for the story for WWE to tell the story that Shawn told Bret to get his ass out of the ring. Even back then, like I said, I'm sure that Shawn was very appreciative of Bret going out there and giving him an hour-long match and passing the belt to him. I don't think at that time the heat was enough to have Shawn say something like that disrespectful towards Bret. And even Bret tells a story himself. He goes, after it, when I leave, I'm leaving for a few months, I'm going to say some things about you in interviews. Let's build this up that we have legitimate heat with each other. So I think this is a lie that became the truth. I don't even think WWE's necessarily lying about this happening. I think they really think that. Or Bret thinks that's what he heard. Because Bret was laying on the mat. He wasn't looking at Shawn. He was face down. And if Shawn says to Earl, wait till Bret's getting out of the ring, maybe Bret heard, tell him to get his ass out of the ring. Maybe Bret just misheard Shawn. And this whole time, this has been a big misunderstanding. And all he did was just hear what Shawn said wrong. But as I've studied this match over and over, and like I said, I'm a Bret versus Shawn connoisseur, this is one thing I call bullshit on. I don't believe Shawn told him to get his ass out of the ring at WrestleMania 12. I think Shawn was telling Earl to wait until Bret's leaving the ring. And this isn't the first time somebody's had to tell Earl this. WrestleMania 6, Hogan and Warrior. Warrior wins the belt. Hogan misses the leg drop, splash, 1, 2, 3. Earl comes in the ring with both belts. Watch it back. Earl comes in the ring with both belts, hands both belts to the Ultimate Warrior. Warrior grabs the Intercontinental and then shoves the Winged Eagle right back in Earl's chest. Like, literally, get that shit out of here. Don't you remember? Hogan is supposed to present this thing to me. Or Earl just didn't know that. But Earl has made that mistake before. So I think Warrior had to check him at WrestleMania 6. No, Hogan's got to give it to me. And I think this was the same thing. I think it was Shawn Michaels knowing that he's supposed to get the belt with Bret watching. Bret's not watching yet. Let's wait a minute. That's all it was. So I think that's a big hole. I don't even know why I'm bringing this up. It's just when I watched it, I'm like, that's bullshit. So I think if WWE ever wants to do another documentary series on Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, they need to call good mic work, because I will tell them what's right and wrong.